Thank you for coming, and thank you to our contributors. I've got very elaborate thanks, actually, on the first page of the principles, because so many people have been involved in contributing to the content, commenting on it, and providing insights upon which the content is based. This is kind of the end of phase one. It's the end of a beginning, not beginning of an end, to publish these. And I'll explain why. We've looked very sensitively at what happens around the world. These principles are not emanating from an organisation that's solely concerned with what's happening in its own domestic circumstances. These are designed to be based on insights from around the world. I won't thank people individually, but I will say thank you to Simon Liebes, because Simon, as Chief Executive of Cambridge Assessment, has been very tolerant of us looking in great depth at textbooks and materials. We're an assessment agency, but of course the work that we do takes place in a theoretical framework which is driven by our understanding of the complex relationships which exist within education systems. Assessment plays just a part. And so Simon and I have discussed absolutely the place and function of elements like assessment, but like textbooks. They play a role in complex relations. And one of the things I really want to emphasize in the short time I have is this idea of complexity and the relations in which things like textbooks actually sit. Now, many people say, oh God, Tim's off on textbooks again. Okay, he's obsessed by textbooks. But surely it's right to identify a lack of rigorous thinking about a particular thing in our system, a particular thing in systems around the world, which is of great importance and has been neglected in certain settings, or is causing trouble in particular settings. Isn't it right to stop for a moment and drill down when one particular element of complex systems is worthy of attention, is worth thinking about in order to improve it? So, for a short period of time, the organisation has sanctioned me to be obsessive about textbooks. And we see that as a very positive thing, because we've managed to get some really important insights, I think, out of that very forensic look. And at this point, paying for textbooks, this is fascinating, because textbooks are paid for in different ways, both their development and their distribution. They're paid for in startlingly different ways around the world. This is exactly what we've looked at, these kind of differences. We've drawn the insights from those differences into the principles so that they can be considered when materials are being developed, when they're being reformed, when new editions are being created. The principles are designed to support effective dialogue between an assessment agency and publishers in this context of complex relationships. Well, how is high quality going to be supported? How is it going to be funded? I mean, if individual teachers are told you all have to create your own materials, how expensive is that to the system? What is foregone in their time by them doing that? The point is, if we want high quality, and I think, come on, Bennett, good teachers using bad textbooks, surely it's better for good teachers to use good textbooks. How do we get that quality into the materials? That value has to be created. And we've looked at the way in which those relationships are managed in different systems so that value is assured. In talking about textbooks, it's shorthand. We talk about teachers too, that's shorthand. We talk about learners, that's shorthand. Well, what do we mean by textbooks? In our research, we would talk about a suite of materials in a particular country setting, a teacher's guide to a 11 to 16 science scheme. With that guide, a teacher's textbook with model lessons and a teaching sequence. With that, a set of pupil workbooks, which include homework and practice activities. With that, a guide for running practical activities, providing a list of model experiments. With that, linked online learning activities, enrichment materials. With that, linked online assessment. Now that's a kind of pattern over the provision of suites of materials which we're seeing emerge, both in England and around the world. We're talking about all of those when we refer to textbooks. So digital as well as a paper, but we're doing more work on digital, and these will be updated soon in terms of the insight from all that research. I want to just read out this. This is very, very interesting. This is from Lucy Crehan's forthcoming book, Cleverlands, where she taught in a whole range of settings, Singapore, Japan, Canada, Finland, in a year. And it lends beautiful, beautiful contextual insights from the practice of teaching to the theory of transnational comparison of different systems. In Finnish schools, and we all know what we think about Finland, in Finnish schools, and this is a quote very recently, from only a few months ago, the textbook is the main tool. Sorry, it's an incredibly autonomous system in which teachers do their own thing. In Finnish schools, the textbook is the main tool. This is from a Finnish educator, a leading educator. Experienced and skillful teachers have come together with a publisher to create an interesting, enjoyable and motivating textbook that's based on the current curriculum. Nowadays, teachers have so many other things to do than planning the lessons that I would say all the teachers depend on the materials a lot. I think our system is really typical. I think this system is really typical for Finland and concerns the whole country. Of course, there are some exceptions, teachers who insist on doing their own thing and maybe not even using textbooks, but that's really rare. Who has the time? Yeah, that's a quote from Finland now, and that's fascinating. In fact, all the Finnish educators and teachers I talk to, when asked the question, what makes Finnish education good and what made it good in the past, they say brilliant teachers and brilliant resources. I mean, they all say that. Now, our work is based on very, very, very carefully controlled, elaborate empirical research, well theorised, as Bennett has described, a lot of background theory. You know the extent to which we've used Bill Schmidt's work on curriculum coherence, key elements, textbooks and materials being one element in a complex set of relationships. So well theorised. But I just want to tell you an anecdote. So we've done the work, we've circulated textbooks count, we've stimulated debate and in some cases quite grumpy debate, which I'll come on to. But I have telephone calls all the time. And one telephone call really brought me up short recently. It was from a woman in Ireland who moved a year or so before from England to Ireland. And what she said was extraordinary. My son is severely dyslexic. And in moving to Ireland, where there's much more systematic use of high-quality textbooks, my son is now thriving, where he struggled in England. With a textbook and the kind of textbooks which he is now using, he can take his time. He can bring it home. We can discuss it. He can go back to things that he struggled with. Now, isn't that interesting and counterintuitive? That a severely dyslexic child is better supported by written materials than by a system in which they are not systematically used. Very, very interesting. Another anecdote. As usual, I dreaded going through the front door of my house and saying to my daughter, what homework have you got tonight? And as I opened the front door, I heard the crumpling worksheet. And, so I uncrumpled it and looked at it and thought, okay, well, I better confront it. This is the homework for this evening. And we had the usual argument. We got through it. But when you think of worksheets, when you think of the textbook, and you think of what all the children now say, who I work with and put the latest CUP textbooks, 800 pages, okay, for preparing for a GCSE, in front of children, what they say is, have I got to learn all of that? Okay. Now, the crumpled worksheet, the textbook, the child. Learners don't understand the domain of physics. They don't understand the domain of mathematics. They need a careful journey through it. And they also need to think about the whole. Have I got to learn all of that? What's in that domain? And how do they progress through it? They don't possess a schema, a notion of the shape of the subject. And they don't possess an understanding, at the stage that they're at, of the route to come. But the kind of materials that we're describing, textbooks with careful sequences, they suddenly see the domain, they can understand the domain, they can flick backwards and forwards through it. And indeed, they can flick backwards and forwards through it in a way in which they can't do with an elaborate website. You can't see the whole, you can only see the parts. Worksheets are fleeting experiences, learning which comes and goes, learning which kids don't go back to. This is very, very important. So, again, Simon was very tolerant of us supporting the National Curriculum Review. We spent a lot of time supporting the state in terms of the National Curriculum Review. As part of that, we looked at over 200 textbooks from high-performing jurisdictions, but it consisted not only of looking at them as artefacts, it was them in their location within the system. We looked at the elements which constitute high quality and also the way in which they support curriculum coherence. There is a practical dimension to it. We've looked at impact, approval, information elements, and design and how those come together. And it includes an examination of the research comparing the assets of paper and digital, and I've just touched briefly on them now. We highlighted the issues and challenges in England, but the principles are not English-centric. They are based, as you have heard, on our deep commitment to global implementation of high-quality materials. So they ask questions of publishers in the creation of the materials. They are a set of questions and criteria, and they're to be used in development discussions and joint work with publishers. And that's where I want to refer to grumpy discussions, because Caroline Wright and Emma House have done fantastic work with BESA and the PA. But I do remember the telephone call, Caroline, where Caroline was pretty fed up with me. Because she said, textbooks count, Tim. That's this speech by Nick Gibb. It's just not that bad. We are concerned with quality. And I was pulled down to a meeting in London with publishers and PA and BESA, and they were pretty upset by the report. Because in a sense, some people were saying, and Caroline was sensitive to that, is that Cambridge is saying that textbooks in England are of very poor quality. And to some extent, that is what we were saying. We had picked up the evidence that was submitted to the Select Committee. But I came out of the meeting with all of us understanding that what Cambridge's criticism of was not of people or particular publishers, but of the set of relationships which were obtaining in England and were giving rise to poor quality. And I think what Caroline and Emma understood, and the publishers in the room, is that we wanted to help policymakers and those working with publishers, including teachers, understand the complexity of these relationships and manage them in such a way that all of them would drive us towards high-quality materials of the kind which Fei Shen and Debbie have described. And what I've found extraordinary and remarkable is the speed with which those collaborative relationships, beneficial collaborative arrangements, have been put in place in this country. So it was assumed by some journalists that we were knocking the publishers and arguing that there should be immediate state approval of textbooks. That's not what we're saying. We're saying is that the relationships in a given jurisdiction should be managed in such a way that it ineluctably gives rise to high-quality materials, which are supportive of the best pedagogy in the classroom. Some people have said, textbooks, well, it's trouble. How can you describe this complex suite of materials? So we'll carry on using textbooks, but it's not just about paper-based. And it's not that there's one true model. Listen to the evolution that Fei Shen talked about. Listen to the interesting evolution that David talked about. It's about encouraging scientific accumulation of insights, and also this notion that all textbooks are top-down. Of course, they're a point of authority once they're created, but they are in Shanghai, in Singapore, and increasingly in England. The best textbooks come from distilling the very best from practice, curating it into a single source at the top, and then disseminating it with sensitive CPD. So yeah, they are top-down, but the content is generated from highly sensitive empirical analysis of what is best. Of course, what's best in some of the Shanghai textbooks are things that have worked for centuries. And I found one brilliant question, which was about cones and and the volume of cones, which was first set in 1601 in China. They carry on using it because it works. And the counterintuitive findings. The best teachers around the world are the most supportive of good textbooks. That was Reynolds and Farrell's finding in 1999. It continued absolutely to be the case. And we ask that whenever we go into a jurisdiction about who uses them, how they support them, and how are they used. The materials carry far more functions than is often supposed. And what we have tried to do in the materials is actually collate the complexity and provide a set of principles that enable the management of that complexity. Pedagogic models, the images, the sequencing, the way in which they're used, the accompanying CPD, it is very, very complex. And that complexity and the quality has to be held right the way through the production process so that, you know, the graphic designers don't mess it up at the 11th hour by, you know, a ridiculous image. So there is a profound balance of things which persist and things which are improved, this distillation of high quality. And people say, oh, you know, textbooks are a rigid straitjacket, only if they're used inappropriately. If they're used effectively by teachers who understand the underpinning pedagogic model, who understand the needs of their learners in a given setting, then they are a flexible resource. And they're not top down in any simple way. They represent the mediation of curriculum intentions, you know, deals between the state and society, aim, sequencing, depth of treatment. They have learning models which often implicitly drive them, but explicitly should be clear to the teachers that use them. Models of ability, models of progression, ideas about practice, ideas about deep learning. And the support and good practice, which the materials are intrinsic to, it causes the perpetuation of things that work. You know, the Shanghai regional competitions for the best lessons which go through into the textbooks. They constitute dissemination of that good practice through a system, something which we really struggle with. And what I will end really with this, that we talk to many administrators in countries and jurisdictions around the world, and they've kind of given up on their publishers, actually. They say, there's terribly difficult people. We're going to have to reform our system, but, you know, the textbooks, they're just stuck in the past. Well, goodness me, textbooks count, and the originally grumpy discussion which I had with Caroline, which translated into an incredibly collaborative and effective development process, that's been less than 2 years. And the kind of textbooks which I'm now seeing emerge, based on some of the best practice around the world, simple things like pre-assessment in the beginning of each chapter, that's happened really quickly. And that's what we're able to tell some of these administrators around the world, anxious to reform their systems. Don't give up on the publishers, don't give up on the textbooks, because look at the speed of reform which we've managed to secure in England without top-down prescription from the state. Improvement has been remarkably swift in England. But we still, the trouble with that message is it says you can do it really quickly. What we know from the story of Singapore, what we know from the highest quality jurisdictions around the world, is that you need decent lead time. You need a cycle of curriculum change which enables the publishers to put science into the generation of the next generation of textbooks. So even though it's impressive, even though it's fundamental, even though the lead time is impressive in England, even though we know that textbooks are fundamental in educational reform, we hopefully, in the principles, have given insights into how you manage the complexity within a time frame which can give rise, in all instances, to high quality. Thank you very much indeed.